Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host Alan Sakyan, and now on our second part of the day, we have Dr. Andrey Kunov. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes, Andrey is the founder and CEO of Silicon Valley Innovation Center. We're going to be talking about the future of business. We're going to be talking about disrupting education. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to have you.
Likewise. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're always welcome. Silicon Valley Innovation Center, I'm so happy to have met the family there. Like everyone there that's hustling to bring in people from around the world, show them kind of what Silicon Valley's up to, also learn from them and what they're doing across the world. It's totally my vibe.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Alan. I started this company about 7 years ago. Before that, I was working at Stanford University, organizing all kinds of programs, working at the center, which was called the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. Originally, I am from Kazakhstan myself, which was a part of the former Soviet Union. So it was kind of natural, I guess, for me to run a center like that back at Stanford. Part of my responsibilities there was to run executive education programs that would involve incoming groups of executives from all over the world who would come and learn from the faculty of Stanford University. Stanford was, of course, a great place to organize programs like that. But the thing is that now education is evolving a lot, right, in different directions.
Yes,
one of the directions is trying to learn from the source. And that's where I found an opportunity to start a new company where I could connect my clients not just with the best faculty of the world, not just with professors, you know, who have lots of interesting academic knowledge, but not necessarily a lot of practical knowledge. I started a company which would provide a new type of education for executives, and that would be education that would be coming out of companies, technology companies.
Yep.
Now, our faculty are entrepreneurs, are engineers, people who create new businesses, entire Silicon Valley pretty much. And this is why I called this company Silicon Valley Innovation Center, because we still continue innovating ourselves, you know, when we're trying to reinvent what education, at least executive education, is all about.
Yeah.
But we're also trying to invent new business models for ourselves as well, and for our partners in Silicon Valley, all the companies that are hosting our groups.
Yes. And so there's the component of executive innovation and executive education. Let's go to the journey, the journey that led you to be who you are and how you got to where you are. So were you born in Kazakhstan as well?
Yes.
Yes. So when did you decide to move around for university and for et cetera? Yeah.
I was born 46 years ago in Kazakhstan when it was still a part of the Soviet Union. My ancestors, my mother's parents, were Polish peasants who used to live in that part of Poland which was divided between Hitler and Stalin when the Second World War started. So my folks were exiled from that part of Poland, which became part of Ukraine in 1939, to Kazakhstan. That's how they ended up being there. Wow. It's not like it was necessarily the best choice for them to live, but that's how Soviet Union in many ways operated back then.
Family's Polish then?
Yeah. My mother's family is Polish, you know. My father's family was Ukrainian, and they ended up being in Kazakhstan for different reasons. But that's how, you know, they found each other. And I was born in Kazakhstan. As I said, it was not like the best place to be born, to be honest with you, because I was born like in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. It was a part of a steplag, which was a part of a gulag, and gulag was like a network of labor camps and concentration camps in the Soviet Union. It was not like I was affected by, my family was not affected by that system, but it was a place in Kazakhstan where I was born was not an easy place to live, let's put it this way, which gave me a lot of motivation, you know, to kind of find something more interesting in life.
Yeah.
So I went and I graduated from my first university in the capital of Kazakhstan, Almaty, in 1994. I got my so-called red diploma, which was like a straight A's diploma there in philosophy and political science. Philosophy was something that I was really always fascinated about. But you know, in the mid-90s, getting a job as a philosopher in Kazakhstan, it was next to impossible, of course. So I had to do something more practical for my life, and I decided to continue my education. So I went to Hungary. I got admitted to Central European University there. So I got my master's degree in economics and transition economics and politics from the Central European University in Budapest. Then I moved to Northern England for another year, Newcastle. Newcastle University, where I got another master's degree in international politics. Nice. Oh, international economics, actually, that's what it was. It was in 1996. I almost forgot about this. And then I was admitted to Stanford, and that's how I came to the US. And that was...
How did you know that you wanted to go to the Stanford area, to the Bay Area? How did you know?
I had a very good friend back then who I met when I was still a student in Kazakhstan. His name was Robert Young. He was already in his 70s when he visited Kazakhstan, and we kind of became friends. And he was the graduate of Stanford University. Cool. And he was the first guy who told me about Stanford back then, that there is this great university, Andrey, and you have to think about, you know, applying there, all of that. And somehow, miraculously, he was the guy who found a fellowship, which I applied for when I was already a student in Newcastle, and he was traveling somewhere in Kazakhstan. He found an ad about a fellowship that was advertised by Stanford University across all post-socialist countries. It was called New Democracy Fellowship. It was organized by a few Stanford professors, including people like Condi Rice. She was a provost at Stanford, Condoleezza Rice, and Alex Dallin, who was one of the top leading Sovietologists back then. So they got together, they found some funding to help former students, well, back then it was still the current students of the from Eastern Europe, to get the top-rate education in the United States. So I was lucky to get, you know, to apply for that fellowship, and Bob Young, a friend of mine, he connected me essentially to Stanford by sending this fellowship to me. And you know, the rest is history. I was admitted to Stanford. I got first graduated with my master's, then I was admitted to PhD. So I got my PhD in 2008.
Political economy.
Political science, strictly speaking. But I also took lots of courses in the econ department, in the business school. So my academic field that I was most interested in was political economy. That's what I was always fascinated about. And for a long while, I was thinking that I'm going to be a researcher, you know, studying how politics affects the economy and vice versa across different countries. But then,
that's a fascinating field.
You're right. It's a great field.
Geopolitics, geoeconomics, how things move, how they're made, and then how they move across country lines, how they get sold to the different people in those countries, how they're consumed, and then what happens to the good or service afterward. All that stuff is so interesting.
Well, I would say especially now when you see, again, I'm not practicing, I'm not a researcher anymore. I cannot say that I am up to what's happening in research on these topics. But what we're seeing here right now is that the boundaries that used to define our living in the past, geographic boundaries, are becoming less important, right? And there are new types of entities that are being created as we speak. You know, entities like Facebook, for example. You know, this is not a national entity, and yet it permeates many countries right now, many societies in various ways, right? We just heard about the scandal that Facebook has leaked so much information, private information, for hundreds of tens of millions of people, right, in the US. And that affected the elections in various ways. So things like that, of course, are affecting the old ways how people used to think about political economy, used to think about their political identity, their economic well-being, all of that, and things like that are profoundly changing the way we live. And I think what is happening is that these processes are accelerating as we speak. We are somewhere on a curve for exponential growth in many ways. So the way how fast we were moving before is very different from the way how fast we are right now. And tomorrow we will probably be changing even faster.
Yeah, and that's why everything that we're discussing right now about future business and innovation and education and all that, again, has just been changing so much over time. This hockey stick, upward we go. So, okay, so I mean, let's touch a little bit more on the political and the economics before we get into more SVIC stuff, just because this is so interesting. What are some of the most profound things that you learned in your last couple of years before Silicon Valley Innovation Center, when you were working within the technology development in Kazakhstan and within the Eurasian studies at Stanford and stuff, and bringing the executives here? What was kind of the political and economic conversations about how to best to move forward as the world? Well,
Stanford as a place was, of course, and still is, an amazing place to be, I would say.
Definitely.
It's where you can find a lot of very gifted students being taught by a lot of very talented professors. So I personally enjoyed my years of being there. I've been there for almost 10 years, because it was like a golden cage. It's not easy to get in there, but it's even harder to get out if you have a chance to stay. So I kind of enjoyed being there for quite a while. And part of that, of course, was intellectual curiosity that you can satisfy there by hanging around different people who are thinking about the future, who are building new, discovering new facts, essentially doing science. And being a part of that process, of course, was really fascinating. For me personally, I've always been struggling with the question of, like I said, political economy, to what extent politics affects economic processes and vice versa. How much politics is a function of economic developments, right? So just to take one question, democracy, right? We have seen over the last 100 years, a huge spread of democratic values all over the world, right? 100 years ago, most of the countries were not democratic, right? They were run by all kinds of, kings or autocratic regimes, all of that. And now, when we see what's been a trend over these 100 years, was a spread of democracies. Now you start. I always wanted to answer this question: is it coincidental that growth in democratic values has always kind of been closely matched with the economic development of those countries as well? Could you sustain a democracy in a poor country? Or could you have a very rich society that would not want to be democratic?
There's a good amount of literature on the North Korea, South Korea, inclusive versus exclusive economy, and what it does, and political economy, what that does to the country. You can see right now the difference between South Korea's success in the world and North Korea's not success in the world. So that I would say that democracy has been, but to what extent has it been a major impact with economic success?
Right. That's exactly a question, right?
It's a good question.
We know from our history that, well, even from the current state of affairs, that there are some rich countries that are not democratic. Like I just visited Singapore, for example. It's a pretty rich country. Or we just had a few clients who came to visit us from Saudi Arabia, and that's a kingdom with its own culture, which is not very democratic. Let's put it this way, even though they are changing as well pretty quickly right now. Yes. And then you get other examples on the other side of the spectrum. Countries like India, right? It's not a very wealthy country, right? If you look at the per capita income, and yet they are quite democratic, right? So the relationship between wealth and the adoption of democratic institutions is not straightforward, right? You don't get it going in the same way, both of them. But the general trend, in my opinion, well, that's, I guess, my conviction that I hold, is that in order to sustain the spread of genuine democratic values, you need to give enough economic freedoms to people as well. This is when you get a very robust, healthy middle class, those people who really care about their freedoms, and they use those freedoms to continue developing their wealth. Like, for example, freedom of expression. It's a very important freedom that helps people to predict, kind of to think about the future, right? When they can understand what politicians are talking about, or what you could say against the politicians. You can plan your economic, you can do better economic planning for your life, for your family. And this is when I think political freedoms and economic freedoms and economic development go hand in hand. You know, when you have a very robust middle class that needs political freedoms in order to sustain its economic growth. And when you get those two things diverge from each other, that's when there is a danger that some societies can become increasingly autocratic.
We're going to go down a really good path with that. We'll get to it at the very end. I'm excited to hear your thoughts. And it's so good that your political and economic expertise and background, to hear some of your thoughts on it at the end will be really, really important. And even now to be able to, for the world to care more about politics and economics and how that impacts our world, that's another whole hour-long conversation for us to have. Now, okay, you just had Saudi Arabia come to Silicon Valley Innovation Center. You learned a lot from what they were bringing to you, and you were teaching them a lot. Maybe tell us about, kind of like, walk us through what that experience is like for you and for them. How do you help them? How do they help you? Why do they even come out here and interact with you?
Well, that particular client, actually, they visited us a few months ago. Without naming names here, it was one of the companies, major companies from Saudi Arabia, that was involved in distributing major car brands. And they came to Silicon Valley to understand what's going on with that particular vertical market, with cars, right? The entire industry of transportation is now being reshaped so quickly that we get, self-driving cars showing up on the market, right? You get electric cars, and all these trends are affecting profoundly the entire industry, including those players who are distributing cars, and they want to understand what's going to happen to them. Just to give you one example of how these new technology trends can play out, specifically in auto markets. If you get self-driving cars being very popular among the young people as a way of driving instead of using a ride, essentially, not driving themselves, you can end up getting the number of cars being owned reduced dramatically, right? Yeah. So that's already been happening with companies like Uber or what's the other one that I'm using Uber mostly, but Lyft, of course, yes. Both of those cars are providing pretty reliable services right now for us to be driven anywhere. So there's, especially in a place like San Francisco, you don't need to have a car anymore.
Yeah. And then what do you do with the parking meters on the streets, the parking garages? How does that impact the economy?
Yes.
When you own an autonomous car,
exactly.
and then your autonomous car goes and makes you money while
That's right.
driving other
That's
people
right.
around. And,
yeah, there are so many different scenarios, right, that might affect, let's say, car dealerships that these guys were in as a business in different ways. You know, maybe the amount of cars in the future will be dramatically reduced as a result of these new technologies, right?
Yes.
We might end up getting new types of transportation, like flying cars.
Yeah, correct.
Right. So these guys have come in order to understand how far away are we from those futuristic things to start happening in our lives.
When should they start changing up their business plans? When should they start partnering with more and more of the AI and electrical vehicle companies and that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Silicon Valley is one of those amazing places where you can come and you don't really have to go anywhere else to understand pretty much almost like everything from across different technology trends that can affect the future of your industry. And this is what makes people very attracted to this place, because we're almost like manufacturing magic here. I mean, those people who work in these companies, I shouldn't take any ownership for creating magic myself, but at least what we do, to a certain extent.
You should a little, though.
Yes.
I think you should.
I think I should.
And I think we should as well. We do just a very little bit. We do our part.
Right.
Yeah. And you can connect the people that come from Saudi Arabia to somebody that does actually, to companies that do build the electrical cars and the artificial intelligences that drive those cars. So, and they want to be connected to them. They want to know from the source, like you were saying earlier.
And it actually benefits both sides. You know, it benefits the established industries, those who want to understand what's going on, but it also benefits the local startups, because they are the ones who are trying to get attention to their inventions as well, right? They're looking for the markets, they're trying to reach to customers, and we're the ones who are bringing those customers to their door.
From around the world to their door, So, okay, so you mentioned you know, the future of business being potentially, tell me if this is right, is the future of business something along the lines of, I'm looking at my business within the industry and I see, you know, a technology that's currently being disruptive in my industry, so I need to do things like prepare myself with my business and my strategy by going and making lots of relationships with that technology that is disrupting that business, so my business can be a leader in the future?
Yes. Well, first you have to understand what's going on, right? In order to make any intelligent decisions about the future course, you have to understand where you are right now, right? And what kind of technologies are coming to disrupt the business, your industry, your business potentially, and how you should build your strategy in anticipation of those changes, right? So the first stage has always to be like an exploratory stage, where you have to, as a business owner or maybe an executive working for a large company, you have to understand what you don't know. And when we don't know what we don't know, right? And that's what is important to understand, that the limits of our knowledge on these new technologies that are being created as we speak. Coming to Silicon Valley allows you to learn what you don't know, right? To extend your horizons in your knowledge of different technologies, but also understand how new startups are taking those technologies and turning them into the new disruptive business models. Those business models that might be quite superior to what you might have. And that's where the threat of disruption might be coming from, right? New businesses that have a potential to steal all your customers, right? Because they are doing something way better than you do. And if you recognize that threat, that's when you should start thinking about transforming your business. You know, and thinking about different ways how you could protect yourself against that disruption by also, you know, improving your products, you know, perfecting your services, and perhaps even creating those startups yourself as well as a large company. And that's what we have seen many large businesses have been trying to do. You know, setting up new digital entities that would be almost like self-disruptive for them, and yet they would help them, these entities, to preserve their position on the market. Instead of just passively observing the way how you're getting disrupted by others, you better take your risks and maybe set up your own startup. So that's one of the ways.
Name one car company that doesn't have an autonomous division.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Yeah. Yes. All of them are recognizing now that autonomous cars, you know, they will define the future.
Whether they like it or not.
And not exactly.
Yeah.
And not just autonomous cars, but also electric cars.
Yes,
you know,
correct.
I think many large
gasoline
companies,
engines, over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
For multiple reasons.
Yes.
Right. Not just for one reason.
Not for just environment.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. So this is what's happening, and it's great to be in the middle of it.
Yeah. That's why we live here.
Yes.
Again, this just a very short story is that the reason why I came here was because so many entrepreneurs were coming from Silicon Valley to the business school in the University of Minnesota and just coming up to them with these lists of ideas. How do I build these into the world?
Right.
Move to where everyone's doing it, kid. Go do it there where everyone's doing it. And so that was the big like, aha, I do, I will, and I did. And it's been the best decision of my life. I get to surround myself with all these brilliant people, and there's more brilliant people around the world, but this is just this hub. Like you said, people get to come here, they get to, okay, let's, a little bit more about the future of business. Okay, so we're in the middle of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has all these different trends that are disrupting business. The future of business is to be able to go and analyze how these trends are disrupting business and to apply them to these new technologies to how you do your own business, so that way you don't get left behind yourself.
Yes, that's right.
And so as I do that, everyone seems to be saying, you know, data is the new oil, and blockchain is the new security and cryptography, and then so everyone's, you know, overhyping so many of these different areas. And maybe what are some valuable, because it's different for every business.
Yes.
It's different for every business what's disrupting it. But what are kind of some of the hot button? We talked about autonomous cars.
Right.
What have been some of the other hot button topics that people are coming in and wanting to learn about, what they think is revolutionizing their world and potentially their business? So that's why they're here learning about it.
Well, here's what we have seen with our clients. First of all, when you live in Silicon Valley, you kind of live inside of this bubble, right?
Yes.
It's the bubble that continues to perpetuate itself, not just in terms of the valuations of the companies, but also the way how advanced people are in thinking about new technologies. You know,
do you
like
have a blockchain yet?
Exactly. Like, you know, cryptocurrencies, everybody's obsessed now about that, you know, ICOs, all of this. But when you go outside of this bubble, you know, just, you know, go like 500 miles away from Silicon Valley, you still find most companies are conducting their business the way they did it like 20, 30 years ago.
Fax machine?
Yeah, exactly. So once you move away from Silicon Valley, you start discovering that most businesses are only now discovering for themselves how to digitally change themselves in some very basic ways. Like, I have hosted some companies that were selling information, and yet they were not digital themselves at all, which is kind of contradiction in terms, right? Selling information and yet not being a digital company, but that's how they are, because they were set up, they were founded like 30, 40 years ago when information was already important, very important, but yet it was not like really digitized. So these companies are now trying to catch up with something very basic for Silicon Valley, is how to digitize your assets, if you have any information assets. So some basic trends like that are very important for established businesses, right? How to protect yourself against disruption in the cyberspace as well, right? Now that you got your physical assets exposed to cybercrime, you have to find the ways how to stay protected against those intrusions, right? And this is where I think we're going to see a lot of innovation happen, simply because lots of businesses are vulnerable, still vulnerable to crypto, well, to cyber attacks, and where there's still a lot of potential for digital transformation. But the more you transform yourself digitally, of course, you know, that's where the paradox is, the more vulnerable potentially you make yourself to all of those attacks, right? So I would say cybersecurity will be a major trend.
Yeah.
Of course, I keep saying crypto. It's because everybody is talking about cryptocurrencies nowadays, and I think even though there is a lot of regulatory,
cryptography is a major part of cybersecurity as well.
That's where they overlap, actually.
Exactly.
I think with cryptocurrencies, we're going to see lots of innovation as well. You know, blockchain. I think it's being overhyped right now, to be honest.
Likewise.
But the real effect of blockchain will probably happen like 10 years from now, maybe even 15 years down the road. But it has a huge potential, you know, creating a technological platforms for building trust without having a third party like a bank or any other institution that has to verify that trust, has a profound effect for multiple industries, not just for banking or financial services, generally speaking.
Definitely.
But I think it has a profound impact for multiple vertical markets. But that's going to happen, like, in my opinion, like 10 years down the road. I don't think we should expect any other such successful use cases as cryptocurrency has been for blockchain so far. But even cryptocurrency has been overhyped itself as well. So I think we always have to be careful about not being too exuberant about these technologies and not becoming a part of this bubble, right? Because if you are investing in these new technologies or new startups or maybe new cryptocurrencies, you better be very careful if you don't know what you're doing.
Jason Calacanis wrote a really good post about that. He did a really good job addressing that exactly, investing in cryptocurrency.
Right.
Maybe you touch a little bit about your most common program is the corporate innovation training.
Corporate innovation and digital transformation.
Yep, corporate innovation and digital transformation. So, and we were just talking about the importance of getting companies into the digital space.
Yes.
And then cybersecurity being a really important, they go together. Once you expand into digital space, we need the cybersecurity to help us protect ourselves. Now on the corporate innovation training, I guess we were also talking about bringing in different companies and what they get to experience with, like, if you're a car company, innovation training with autonomous vehicles. So, okay, so that's the main, those are kind of the main pillars, and then kind of some of the, some of the other kind of secondary stuff. As they come here, they also get partnerships, like with the startup you said, and they get a partner across the world. That's very good, important.
Right.
And then also maybe, what else? Maybe some of the small summits and the big summit kind of stuff,
We do organize all kinds of conferences, or we participate in co-organizing these conferences. The next one that we're doing just a week from now is called a Global Blockchain Forum.
Yep. That's 1 week now from now?
Yeah, 1 week from now. So I would encourage anybody who is watching us live to check it out, Global Blockchain Forum. If it's okay that I advertise.
Of course. Where is it?
It's going to be in Santa Clara Convention Center.
Santa Clara Convention
on the
Center.
2nd, 3rd of April.
On the 2nd, 3rd of
Yes.
April. Cool.
So we're going to be bringing lots of people over there to discuss exactly these issues. You know, how much it's being overhyped, what kind of new applications exist for different vertical markets, you know, how to invest in these new cryptocurrencies, and to be safe in doing that. You asked me about what are the other trends and lessons. Well, one of the interesting lessons, I think, for senior executives, at least for those companies who come to Silicon Valley, has been, at least for me, how important startups are becoming for established markets. When you think about the past, the way how corporate world used to be organized in the past, it was always dominated by the large conglomerates. They were the ones who were calling shots in pretty much all industries, right? They were the ones who
owned
were
all
making
the data that wasn't centralized.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, they, for all kinds of reasons, large size companies were the ones, monopolies were the ones who were determining the way how business was done across different industries. What's happening right now is truly amazing. It's totally revolutionary in my opinion. It's when small companies, small startups are sometimes way too powerful than those corporations. And those corporations are now being more and more frequently becoming victims of these small companies, disrupting these large businesses. Just think about the most recent example. Toys R Us just announced that they're going bankrupt. I mean, it's a sad news for all the employees, the shareholders, and everybody else. But I guess it's kind of logical that retail is losing physical retail is now losing to companies like Amazon, which was just a startup. Another, 20 years ago, Amazon was a tiny company 20 years ago. Now you get Amazon dominating retail markets, right? And totally revolutionizing that. You look across different...
And that's 20 years. I mean, that's the blink of an eye, really.
But what's happening right now, even this blink of an eye is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. When you look at the time, how much time does it take for a small startup to become a unicorn? You see more and more examples of companies reaching this billion-dollar valuation.
Uber and Airbnb
faster and faster and faster.
So fast.
Yes.
And then they completely destroy the hotel market, destroy the taxi market, and just so fast.
Right.
That's nuts.
Yes, and these are just a few examples of how startups, when they're equipped with right people and right technologies, can become this revolutionary force against big established companies all over the world. So this is probably one of the kind of the most shocking examples for me of how innovation works, how disruptive innovation, I guess, works nowadays. And we see more and more and more of those startups coming to the markets to redefine what those markets are all about.
Disruptive innovation.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer just about, and Peter Thiel's so good at explaining this, but it's no longer about just disrupting some small part of some small market. If you want competition, go start a restaurant or a bar. But if you really want to dominate, do unicorn, become a monopoly, you find that thing that, why is nobody else building this thing that everyone would want to have in their lives as value, and then build that thing and become fanatic about building it. You recruit other brilliant people to help you because they love your vision, they love your emotional connection as well to them and to their families and to the business that you're building with them. And then that's how to really create another one of these unicorn companies out there. I love that. Disruptive innovation is something that is just, it flows through the veins of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and I think it's a testimony to the power of new technologies. One of the reasons why small, tiny companies sometimes become infinitely more powerful than the old, huge companies, it's because they equip themselves with the technologies that have that are way more powerful, right, than the ones that existed before. So if you want to be a true disruptive force, perhaps smaller size, it's your advantage rather than your liability, as it was in the past. In the past, when you were dominated by these large players, if you were a small company, it would be very hard for you to compete with them, right? Now, small size often is viewed as an advantage for moving fast, pivoting quickly. Yes, and then employing new technologies that sometimes require a lot of agility. so that you don't have to negotiate its deployment quickly. Sometimes you get in trouble with that as well. Like Facebook, I'm coming back to what I just heard this morning.
Yeah.
It's an example, yes, because Facebook has been experimenting a lot with data, and they ended up in trouble by giving away unwittingly lots of information about its users. Now they're being pounded for that. But hey, it's still a new company, right? And as a new company, I am standing on their side to defend, even if they screwed up big time, made a mistake. But I still think that they deserve a little bit of a benefit of, doubt or credit for what they did as an experiment. Because they were experimenting, and some of those experiments did not end up very well. But as a company, generally speaking, I think companies like Facebook will continue defining our future, in my opinion.
Agreed. And not only do they deserve another chance, of course, with everything, but also think about all of the benefits that we've been able to reap. We are their product. That's why we don't pay for their service.
That's right.
So we're your product. So you get the rights to the data, which will soon change with the. We were just talking to Dan Galey on the show, founder of Synapse AI. He's making decentralized blockchain economies, AI economies. Really smart guy. Probably a great connection for Silicon Valley Innovation Center. But just the idea that this general data and privacy rights it's going to change a lot. We're going to go from the vertical ownership of data to these horizontal marketplaces of data, where Amazon's sharing their data, Facebook sharing, Google sharing. The ones that are left behind
are the consumers.
And they're the ones that aren't sharing the data.
Yeah, that's right.
And the consumers need to do their best to identify the ones that are open sourcing. For example, a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Zers, a lot of people that are young, they put their money where the social activists are. So the ones that actually have some sort of division within their company that focuses on making the world better. So not only is it part of providing value and getting value, but also in terms of what is that company doing to try and make the world better. I think most of the trends are going to move towards something like what Bill and Melinda Gates do with their foundation. The more that people get the chance to earn money, the more that they try and go and help with polio or with malaria or with poverty around the world, or trying to uplift these other people in the world. So it's good that this is, again, we're just totally on the same vibe with trying to have this more global conversation about the future of business and the future of disruption and getting people on the same page. How about we ask you about what's going on with with globalization in general? Because we have the Middle East, we have Asia, we have Africa, we have South America, Central America, Europe. We have all these other parts of the world that are advancing in technology in similar ways as the U.S. and in different ways than the U.S. And so where do we go with the global conversation about how to eradicate things like war and poverty and disease, but also how to collaborate with each other most effectively? What do you think about globalization and how we're moving forward?
I think it's a great question. Globalization has obviously benefited some countries more than it did some other countries, right? When you look at the benefits of globalization, you can see that there were some countries in the past, like United States, I would submit, that has been one of the best beneficiaries of globalized trend. And yet what is happening right now is that those benefits are shifting away from countries that used to, like the US, who used to benefit from it a lot, towards some other countries, like China, for example, right? And now we get the new rhetoric coming from the current leadership in the White House trying to close that open trade, because there are lots of people in the United States who feel fundamentally insecure about globalization, right? Globalized trade, simply because they are not benefiting from that trade anymore. Well, at least they don't feel that like they're benefiting. If you look at the growth of incomes.
Do you think that's the reason that the Trumps and the Teals of the world are becoming more nationalistic, is because they're not benefiting from the trades with China?
They're certainly finding lots of voter support, right, for those slogans in that rhetoric.
But do you
because
think
there
that
are tens of millions of people.
Do you think that with the political economy, though, that is the true? Is that true, or is that too defensive and national? Are we benefiting more from the open trade and the conversations and the trade with China to further propel globalization?
I personally tend to believe that yes, even though United States is not the main beneficiary anymore from open trade, China probably is. When you look at the bilateral relationship between China and the US, we certainly are running a huge deficit. Right, trade deficit in that relationship. So China is gaining more than the US is, but just strictly speaking in terms of trade. But if you think the alternative scenario, where we stopped all the trade between the two countries, the US would have suffered a lot from that as well, right? So definitely, relatively speaking, the US is still gaining a lot from the open trade, right? It's just that the relative weight of those gains is kind of changing right now.
It's in China's favor now, but does that mean that shutting it off completely, or are we just renegotiating so that it's back to...
Right. Yeah. Well, that's where it becomes really tricky. How do you renegotiate it to make it more fair? Because the way how it would look more fair from the US side, of course, would look totally different from the Chinese side, right? They already said that, you know, they're not going to give up their national interest, so they will retaliate to those measures and so on. So once you get into a trade war, most likely everybody will end up losing from there, because then you get emotions being involved on both sides, you get countermeasures, and it's like in every war. It's very hard to find a war in history where one side would be a clear winner and the other side would be a clear loser. You get both sides usually being really damaged with the war, right? And then one of them would be a more winner, but still losing a lot from where it was before, right? When you look, but this is what all wars are about. And the longer they last, the more losing both sides are from any war, including trade wars. So if this trade war becomes a reality, and if we get this war continue for years and years, then when we will kind of wake up from that nightmare, we will see that the US will have suffered a lot. China will probably suffer as well, but the world is not going to become any better. You know, that's my personal opinion on that. That I don't think trade wars are the right solution for making trade more fair. You need to find some more subtle ways of, you know, fine-tuning the future between different countries.
Agreed on that. Totally agreed on that. I would love to have a more global conversation about trade and about prospering together, rather than just making decisions like, we're going to close off our borders, you're going to close off yours, we're not going to trade anymore, or we're in our own self-interest. It's also not healthy. These are your brothers and sisters across the ocean. No matter what you think, they are your brothers and sisters. Not only are we 99.9% genetically similar, but also you don't need an alien species to be found before you realize that we're all together on this rock. It shouldn't take that long.
And it's a human race. Now there are more reasons for us to think as one entity than in the past. Like just think about environment, for example, right? This is something where we're all tied together. Right? And if we survive, we will survive together. If we go down, we will probably go down together. We're not going to have just one country suffering from, you know, global warming and other countries being fine. No, we have to raise our consciousness to the level when we will all think about each other, like you said, like one huge family. It kind of sounds a bit too naive, I guess, but it's reality of our life. That things like climate or global prosperity, it's another huge public good, I would say, that comes out of global trade. We have to think about it as a product of us as a humanity,
yes,
not just nation states.
Exactly. Andrey, now let's ask you about what do you think as we get to this perspective and we get shifted towards this direction, what do you think about the 8 people that have about as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion? Even though, you know, the Pinker argument is right that everyone is collectively coming up slowly, it's true. This gap, you know, Ron and I always talk about how it's the end of the middle class, pick a side. So what do you think we should do about this middle class, or this inequality that's going on? How do we fix it as a world?
Well, I don't have any kind of perfect solution for that situation. I totally agree with your assessment, Alan, that it's a dangerous situation, right? It's a dangerous situation not only because a few people are becoming so rich that their wealth can be compared to the rest of, you know, population. But it's also the fact that the rest of the population is looking at that situation and they become angry. Even though they are becoming wealthier, yes, that's right, but it's not just in absolute growth in wealth, which is important here. It's also relative changes that make people really angry.
This
you can get
one that was really important was within McKinsey, their studies about the next 70 or so trillion dollars in the next decade or so that's going to be added to the global pie. What percentage of that is going to be made by the 8 people versus the percentage that's made by the other 4 billion?
Exactly. But here's another reason, good reason why it's important. When you think about major social upheavals, like social revolutions that had happened in the past, about the reason when they happened, they didn't happen when those societies were just declining in their wealth. They actually happened when societies were growing, and yet during that process of growth, there was this smaller group of people who were becoming insanely rich, and the others were just growing not so fast. And this is when those who were growing not so fast, they became really angry at those elites that were controlling them. And this is when they rose against and rebelled against that elite. So if we want to avoid these very disruptive changes in societies, we have to be mindful of what this relative growth in wealth can create among the wider population and how they are going to react to this, right? So in order to avoid major violent disruptions in the future, I think, well, both rich people have to think about how to be more benevolent with their wealth. And I think some of them are setting up amazing examples of giving away their wealth. Like you mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates.
Maximizing the efficacy of giving away their wealth is really
important. That's right. And not just giving away, but actually taking care of their wealth. Right? And trying to alleviate some of the major problems in Africa and elsewhere in the world. I think this is
how much more fulfillment and meaning does hiring 50 people to solve a global problem do for you than buying a third yacht? Right?
Exactly.
What gives you more meaning in life?
That's right. That's right. So I think these people have a special social responsibility before the rest of society, from which they actually benefited, right? By building their wealth. Nobody wants to deny, of course, their talents and their right to use that wealth. And yet, in my opinion, these people have a huge personal responsibility for the future development of humankind, and they have to respond in kind to societies from which they have built that wealth, right? And that's why I applaud Mark Zuckerberg when he announced that he's going to spend like 99% of his fortune the same way like Bill Gates did. And I think these are amazing examples that are being established by the wealthiest people, and these examples have to, I think, have to be used by the other, wealthy people, how to turn that wealth for the benefit of humanity.
Yeah, especially because it came from the piggybacking on all the people that decided to pay you for your goods and services.
That's right.
So, okay, how about the question of what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The most beautiful thing in the world. Well, I think where we have an opportunity to create the most beautiful thing in the world comes from inside of ourselves rather than from outside. And I personally believe that the way how we can apply our inner world to outside, in my opinion, is like every time when we see creativity being manifested by people, that's where beauty actually comes from, in my opinion, right? So every time when you see a new invention being built, that could be the most beautiful thing in the world. For me personally, I guess it's my family. That's my children are the most beautiful creatures in the world, and in some ways I of course participated in creating them, even though I don't attribute it just to myself and my wife.
So it's kind of that moment of turning what's inside of you with the way that you feel like you can bring your most value to the world and actually delivering that to the world. That's kind of...
I personally believe that this is our destiny as a humankind, is to manifest our inner potential and apply it to the rest of the world.
It's beautifully said.
Some of those things might be really ugly, like atomic bomb. It's also our manifestation.
It is true.
Of our creativity
and typically
talent.
by some angry people that are upset about the world, other countries, and all that kind of stuff. It's or people that want to hurt other people, right, across the world. So it's a manifestation of the inner workings that is not as healthy.
And violence, generally speaking, it's also manifestation of who we are, right? All of our hidden fears, hatred, insecurities, all of that. And yet somehow this is the most beautiful thing in the world, in my opinion. It's the way of how we are manifesting ourselves. We're taking what is hidden inside of us and we're applying that to the outside world. And this is how we're defining this world, changing this world. And hey, maybe we will end up killing ourselves, which will be a tragic global mistake, of course, for humanity.
We will not do that.
I hope we don't.
We will not destroy the light of
But
consciousness.
even if that happens, even if that happens, human beings had a chance to manifest whatever they had inside of themselves to the rest of the world. It will be very tragic, of course, and I pray that it never happens, even to a smaller extent, like wars wouldn't be happening, right? Because they're a huge waste of our energy and human lives. Even trade wars are terrible, like we just discussed. Yes, but I think the most, just to return to your question, the most beautiful thing, in my opinion, in the world is the way how humans are capable of manifesting themselves.
I love that. I love that. All right, how about, are we alone in the cosmos?
Are we alone in cosmos? You're asking, it's almost like a philosophical question. It's not only physical questions, right? We haven't had, officially speaking, any contact that would be recognized socially or politically as official contact with other lives, I guess, other civilizations. I personally tend to believe that there are lots of other dimensions that we just don't know about, that exist in parallel with our existence. And there are lots of weird things that happen in our lives that can be explained by the fact that we're not yet in touch with those dimensions, but there might be other worlds. At least intellectually, I cannot rule that out, that there might be other dimensions, temporal dimensions, but also spatial dimensions, where all kinds of beings might potentially exist.
Yeah.
And yet, we as human beings are not at this stage of our development where we could incorporate that experience in our current perception of ourselves and perception of our reality. And this is why there are lots of scientists who don't believe in, in those worlds, simply because, it would be a sheer speculation for them. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, when I'm saying that, I'm also kind of speculating as well. I would say that I don't want to flat out deny the possibility of other worlds existing in parallel with our world as well.
Likewise, Ron and I talk about that a lot. The worlds outside of the 3D reality that our meat puppets, flesh vehicles live within. We love talking about that because we think that it's something that is really relevant.
So what do you think yourself, Alan, about that?
I don't know. But I'm very interested in talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. For example, I had a very fascinating dream where this whole entire studio got a big makeover change. Ron decided to add tons of television equipment, massive cameras and audio systems, and I woke up and I walked downstairs and I was like, whoa, what is going on right now? And so just, what is that a sign of? What is that? Is that just my brain being creative and running a sandbox simulation? Or is there something more to that that goes on outside of what we perceive to be reality, what we actually understand? Right. So we talk about that a lot. And the next question, there's only two more. The second last question is, do you think we're in a computer simulation?
Right now? Are you simulating me or I'm simulating you? Or we are like in a joint simulation? Sort of like a matrix? Well, that's even more speculative question, all right? Well, I think that human beings have to reproduce their consciousness all the time. And in that sense, yes, what is surrounding us and what we feel about ourselves is a product of our life energy. So in that regard, I am simulating this reality. To the degree to which my simulation overlaps with yours, we have a real world, right? So we have lots of conventions about what real world is about. Because there is some kind of a reality out there, right? That we have agreed to think about as a black table, for example, right? Or water, other things. And yet, there are lots of things in my life that don't overlap with yours, right? Which I am also, using your language, simulating for myself.
So I'm simulating your children in your life because I don't know them,
yes,
right?
Yeah. So those artifacts, I guess, those pieces of reality, my reality, they are not a part of our convention. And yet they might be as real for me as the other parts of the reality.
Like your birthplace and your life from 0 to 20.
Even more than
mine
that.
Too.
My convictions, my beliefs. I might have all kinds of crazy beliefs that you will not share, right? Because they're not real for you, but they might be totally real for me. Yeah. And then I can start acting on those beliefs, right? And this is why we get lots of things that we don't agree with.
The Germans have a word for it. It's called Umwelt.
Okay.
Yeah, it's their sphere of perception.
Right.
And so, to what extent does my Umwelt overlap with yours? Right. And then we have these generic ways that we describe our simulation or our reality, whichever you choose. But that's good. Okay.
I guess to that degree, there might be a little bit of simulation, right? And when I die, my simulation, at least in my physical body, stops. And it will stop for all of us at some point.
But then we still talk about you after you die. So then how long does your consciousness live on in that sense?
And this is probably the most fascinating question for science. I regret myself personally that there are not enough scientists who are interested in this question. Yeah. How much of consciousness actually live after our body?
There were people that were measuring it on a scale once someone dies.
Yeah.
And they said something like a couple grams or something get displaced at that point.
Lost with the body weight.
Yeah, and so we don't know exactly what that means, but it's also very, you know, there's not enough people studying it.
Yes.
And that's what shows like this do. We get more people inspired to study it. So please keep sharing it, keep going out there, and keep getting more people excited about understanding
I think the biggest inventions in science that are going to happen in the next few decades are not going to come from physics. They're going to come from learning inner side of ourselves.
Yes.
You know, the way how our brain works with the rest of our body, works with the rest of the world, and how the functions of the brain can actually be replicated and maybe transferred. If we can transfer the activity of our brain, then presumably we can transfer our consciousness out of our physical body into some kind of other carrier. And if that happens, who knows? Maybe humanity will be able to, you know, we will, not just humanity, but we as human beings will be able to sustain ourselves existing in other types of bodies, not just physical existence. And maybe that's how humanity will transfer itself from biological form to some kind of a new form.
We're really excited for that. We just talked about that with Tiniest. We were just talking about transhumanism.
And that's amazing, right?
Process. He actually, his quote is that it's the end of mammals. What's his quote?
Mammals. Yeah, that's right. Well, maybe it's the end of biological life as such, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not like a total end of it. It's just a next step out of that.
Next
we're not going to kill ourselves as a result of that.
The next evolution. How about, as a last question, is what is one thing that you believe to be true that nobody else believes to be true?
Oh, wow. That goes like really deep into the personal convictions, right? You would need to simultaneously believe in something so strongly and at the same time think that everybody else would not believe in that? Wow, that's a very tricky question.
His answers are so diplomatic.
Well, I'm just trying to think about, am I so original in my life that I could have at least one belief that would be so different from everybody else?
Think about the importance of it related to like Bruno and Copernicus and Galileo, right? People that decided that they were the only ones that thought that the Earth actually revolved around the star and not the other way. And then furthermore is think about all the other people that are deemed to be crazy by society because they're the only ones that think in a certain way, and then eventually they're the right ones. And so that's why this question's kind of the 1 verse 99 thing. Like if you're the black sheep, what is it that you hold in your head, and what can you voice to the world about that black sheep thought that we can try and share?
That's interesting. Well, I guess I have lots of beliefs about myself, about the capabilities of my company, but these are all personal beliefs, right? People don't share them simply because they don't know me, right? That's why I would be very unique in holding those beliefs. Your question is more about beliefs that, you know, motivated Copernicus to, you know, to stand up against the church, right? Because he was so confident about Earth not being the center of the world, right? But there's, you know, sun and everything else. In that regard, you know, there are lots of things that have already been discovered, of course. I guess where as a scientist, I still consider myself to be a scientist, where I would stand more separate from the rest of scientific community would be my beliefs about humans being much more than what we know about them right now, that there are multiple dimensions that I mentioned to you before.
That's good.
Where I think most of the inventions will be coming from in the future. We're not going to be going and studying natural physics as a source of major revelations, in my opinion. I think it will be our inner world that will be discovered being intricately connected with physical world outside. Right? So in order to learn about the rest of the world, we have to go inside of ourselves.
Correct.
And maybe observe and meditate more.
Introspection. Swami Ananda was on our show. He said that inner management is the key to enlightenment and is the key to peace and is the key to all of these things that we're talking about, globalization and AI and economics and political theory, all this stuff. He said the meditation and inner management is the key to all of those things. And we found that to be so fascinatingly true. So you are right, and I like that one that you bring up, is that this whole inner workings, really feeling our heart beat that 100,000 times a day, to really feel the way that what you put in your mouth is what actually powers the body, all these cool things. That's kind of what we're
But then again, I'm not sure how different I am from lots of your guests who are already thinking about this. Am I like 1%?
I do think that it's you're in the minority of people that think that the next significant bodies of research are going to actually come from understanding within. I think you are. Okay, so we covered a lot about the future of business, about disruptive technologies, about your background, Silicon Valley Innovation Center. This has been an amazing conversation.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Alan.
Thanks, Andrey. This has
Thank
been
you for
so much
inviting
fun.
me.
We would like to say, do check out SiliconValley.center. Please check them out online, get a better understanding of kind of what they do and the importance of that. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thanks for enjoying the content. Please feel free to comment during the streams. If you had a good time, like, comment, subscribe. Do share the content with other people. Also, if you guys really found the content useful, become patrons. We've had 2 people become patrons in just the last couple of hours today. It's been really great. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. Big shout out to the Mike Harden family office over at Big Rock. Big shout out to Jordan Rain as well. Shout out to our producer and director, Ron Vargas. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll have some more great content for you tomorrow with Joshua Kaufman as well as Jared Faison. So tune in tomorrow. Those will be great shows. And thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.
What a blast.
All right.